waiting for that. Alhamdulillah.
Allah يحفظك يا ربي. So here we go, everyone. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So, inshallah, today is our 85th day with our tafsir with Surah al-Maida. And certainly, we basically went over لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم ولكن يؤاخذكم بما عقدتم الأيمان. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold you accountable for what you had. The word is عقدتم, and we went in details, well, at least in some details, whether that meant a repetition or whether that meant once. And we talked about Ibn Umar and his interpretation. فكفارته إطعام عشرة مساكين. And the kafara, when we said the word kafara, the word kafara in itself, the root that is, basically means to deny, can mean to deny the gratitude, can also mean to cover, to hide, and can also, well, those are the key words. And then we also talked about that the kafara is coming from the word to hide. So then that would be to hide the sin. Okay. So that would be an expiation that a person would do in order to remove the sin, to hide the sin, or the implication of the sin. So if a person wanted to basically go off and go back on an oath that they had made, then in that situation, they would basically pay the kafara. But we said it's not any amen, it's not any oath. We said there are four types of amen. We said there are four different types. One, you're making an oath for the present, like I am doing this, or wallah, well, you're basically doing an oath with it, or for the future, wallah, I will be doing this, or for the past, well, the present or the past, I had done this, okay, or I will do this. That's one kind. Then there's the second kind, basically relating to, we're speaking about perhaps people's rights and you're witnessing upon something. Maybe I could show you just really quick what we were doing last time and show you. Okay, here we go. Let's do it that way so you could actually see what we had done before. We said we're talking about in the future, or in the past, or a witness, yamin, um, or words that are yamin al-laghu, so you don't really mean the yamin. This one doesn't have a kafara, an expiation to pay. This one, there is an expiation to pay. This one, there is an expiation to pay if you lied about it, with differences of opinions between scholars. This one, there is an expiation with differences of opinions between scholars. Okay? Now, why differences of opinions between scholars on the one in the past and the one that you're a witness? Because they considered that there was an actual lie involved here, and it's not just the amen. So this isn't in the future. So the one that they agreed that there's nothing wrong with it and that you can break the oath, but on a condition that you would pay an expiation, is the one in the future. Wallah, I'm not going to visit this. Wallah, I'm not going to ever talk to this friend again. Wallah, I'm going to do such and such for that person for harming me and whatever it is. So in that situation, that's in the future. You regret saying that. You recognize that that was wrong. You recognize that there was a better way of dealing with the situation. Well, that's when you would pay the expiation. It's not enough to regret it, but you would have to pay the expiation um, for making the yamin. So why did they have differences of opinions on the past and the witness one? Because that one was actually a lie. That wasn't just a yamin. So they debated whether this expiation is going to just remove the sin for the yameen, or whether this would also include the lie there as well. And that's the whole debate. And wallahu a'lam is that it's not enough to do the expiation because the person really lied about it. So they would have to do lots of istighfar, perhaps lots of donations, perhaps, in multiple different types, maybe a whole series of different good things in order to remove the impact, the influence, and certainly the the sin for that bad deed of lying. Okay, let's see. So what is the expiation going to look like? Feeding 10 people that are needy, not any type of people, but people that are in need. من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم. How am I going to feed them? What kind of foods? So basically, like the moderation, the average type of spending you would spend on your family. أو كسوتهم, or feeding or clothing 10 people, or تحرير رقبة, or you would basically have to free a slave. So that was when slavery was there. فمن لم يجد, whoever can't find, in other words, cannot afford. So this isn't cannot find alone, but this is cannot afford to feed 10 people that are needy, or clothing them, or freeing a slave. Then in that situation, your alternative would be fasting 3 days. That's basically the kafara. That's basically the expiation that you would pay on behalf of an oath that you had made. And what you're supposed to be doing in general, وَاحْفَظُوا أَيْمَانَكُمْ, you're supposed to be preserving your oath. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically show us those paradigms, those markers for us to recognize that whenever you would make an oath, or you would make a certain relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you really have to be a person of commitment. If the person was not capable of being committed, or if the better option was to not be committed and be committed to whatever is good to do, then in that situation, what you want to be committed to is really the principle. لعلكم تشكرون. So we went in details with, let's see, we said أجمع العلماء على أن الحالف إذا قال أقسم بالله أنها يمين. Okay, so we looked at right there, and just going over some of the things, just making sure that, okay, here we go. I think we didn't cover all of this with you, but okay, yeah, we didn't cover all of this with you. So we're just going to go back. Okay, here we go. This is where we left off at. Let's see. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq had narrated that the Prophet ﷺ had said, من حلف على يمين فرأى غيرها خيرا منها فليأتي الذي هو خير وليكفر عن يمينه. Whoever makes an oath and then realizes that something else is better than that oath, then do what is best and pay the expiation on that behalf of that oath that you had made. So what that indicates is that il-kafara would basically be on behalf of something that a person was going to do in the future, and not necessarily on something that they had done in the past and lied about it. So let's see. Let's look at number 5 right there. Okay, let's see. So I want you to look at this one. So what does that mean? The way that they would do this, there's something called مقابلة المخطوطات. So what would they do? This book that you see in front of you was basically printed off and typed off a manuscript. So they would get all these manuscripts for whatever is available, and then they would name manuscript A, manuscript B that's probably coming from London, manuscript A that's probably coming from Leiden in Germany, manuscript C that's probably coming from Holland, and manuscript D that's probably coming from Turkey, manuscript F that's probably coming from maybe Yemen, okay? And then he would start, whoever is doing this job, they would start comparing the manuscripts that they have in front of them in order to make sure that the final printout has as many manuscripts as they were capable of getting, just to make sure that when they would say perhaps in one manuscript something else, perhaps a different typo, maybe a different wording, etc. So therefore, he's basically saying, well, in some in some of the manuscripts, there's actually mimma instead of fima. Just want you to see how intricate this ilm is, this knowledge and this science is. They will take it each and every single word. And I'll tell you, when we were learning how to do this, especially during our graduate years, um, I was so proud of myself when I actually got the highest grade. It felt so good. I actually thought that my professor was pranking me because that professor that taught us how to do this, he was exceptionally hard to get any good grade with. I mean, exception. If you get an A with him, that's it. You're outstanding. So in that class, we had almost 52 students, 50 students, only 4 women, and all the rest were guys. Okay. And we were basically supposed to do two sets of projects within that class. One set was مقابلة المخطوطات, basically تحقيق مخطوطة. You're going to go over a manuscript and you're going to get the hadith. You have to compare the different manuscripts. You have to basically get all those different names. You got to do a number of different things. Okay. And the second part was consisting of a project that you have to choose a topic and you have to write about that topic. And you have to write about that topic in fiqh. Isn't any topic. You have to choose a fiqh topic. And I chose music. We were supposed to do 20 pages, but it turned out I didn't know how much of a debate music was between and among scholars. I thought it was going to be an easy answer. To discover that it was far more complex than a 20-page report. I basically did 80 pages. It was 80 pages, and I went through all those hadith, and it was probably one of the toughest jobs. Wallahi, I think it was tougher and harder than my PhD dissertation because it required a lot of research, and the debate was way stronger and way more fierce than I had expected. And once he basically corrected all that and went over all our grades, and I was just passing by his office, and then he tells me, Mubarak, Mubarak, Mubarak. Now, he's a very hard professor. He will not tell you Mubarak easily. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Did he actually get a wrong information that I had gotten engaged? I didn't. So I was just looking at him like, okay, you definitely got some wrong information. You're confusing the person here. And I just stayed quiet. I was like, for what? And he said, Mubarak. And I was like, okay, for what? And he said, you got the highest grade in my class. I just looked at him like, are you here, pranking me? I know my professor doesn't prank. This professor is really serious when it comes to dealing with girls. Oh my God, he is so tough. Really, really, really tough. So when he told me that, I just stayed quiet for for a second, and I was like, okay, he doesn't prank, he doesn't joke around with girls. He must be right. He said, you got the highest grade in the class. Ya Allah, I just started crying. I went to do sujood shukr because I was like, Alhamdulillah, I would not have been capable of doing it. Alhamdulillah. Got a 91. So for that professor, that's actually excellent. All right, let's continue. فليكفر, I know this is really off topic, but just remembered it. All right. يستقبل what brought that up? Oh, the مقابلة المخطوطات. Okay. And let's say the second opinion, so the first opinion basically said that you would only pay an expiation on things that you would do in the future. Okay. Not the things that we're discussing the past. Okay. The second opinion, you would pay the expiation even though they're at sin, and even though they had deliberately made an oath and they knew that they were lying about that, then according to Shafi'i, they said, in Abu Bakr, which is Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi here, he said, we don't actually have any statement or any note, any report that would basically support this opinion, and not anything in the Quran, not anything in the Sunnah that would support the opinion according to according to, let's just say, their study. They said that there's no evidence to support that you would just pay kafara, because this involved two sins, or in fact, three different sins. Basically lying about it, making the oath and lying about it, and disregarding the weight or at least the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's say, and he said, well, the evidence is وَلَا تَجْعَلُوا اللَّهَ عُرْضَةً لِأَيْمَانِكُمْ أَن تَبَرُّوا وَتَتَّقُوا وَتُصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. Here's the evidence. So in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and do not let the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be an obstacle from your oath, from doing what is good and what contains the taqwa, the principles of the Lord Almighty, and to reconcile between people. So Ibn Abbas had said, well, this was revealed when a man was basically making an oath to not reach out, to not support his relatives. And that ayah was in a relationship to doing something in the future and wanting to go back onto that. And therefore, the ayah was basically saying, well, you had the option to do the expiation, and therefore you were not supposed to go against, using the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and go against the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what if the person were to do this oath? They wanted to basically respect the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but instead of respecting the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do something that is a principle of Allah, they basically wanted to respect the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and commit an oxymoron, really, and go against the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's when this ayah was revealed. What is the story behind this one? So the story was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, there was an ayah, of course, that was revealed in that regards. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, when people started talking about a Sayyidah Aisha, and what did they say? So Sayyidah Aisha was going with the Prophet ﷺ, with the rest of the army. She wasn't going to be fighting. She was just accompanying the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. And in the middle of the way, she basically loses her necklace, and she stays behind. The Prophet ﷺ didn't notice that Sayyidah Aisha wasn't in her little, I guess, carrier thing, because it was all covered up. Okay, kind of like a caravan. It was all covered up. They didn't know she wasn't in there, but she already had known that the Prophet ﷺ had let Safwan ibn al-Mu'attal, I guess he had a sleeping disorder, but Safwan ibn al-Mu'attal would be coming in at last and just making sure that no one was left behind. So Sayyida Aisha was aware that she didn't need to panic. Someone else was going to come over, clear the path, make sure that no one was left behind. So she was just lying down, waiting for someone to come over. Safwan al-Mu'attal, who was basically always, I guess, the Prophet ﷺ had assigned because of his sleeping problem. So he assigned him basically he's going to wake up later. So he'll wake up later and basically do the job of clearing the path and making sure that no one was left behind. So Sayyid Aisha, of course, he comes across and all he does was La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And that's when she wakes up, makes her he had already an extra horse with him or an extra, I guess, mean of transportation. She goes on it. They basically continue their way all the way to Medina. The Munafiqeen, they see all of this and they would basically assume, oh, there's an affair that we're seeing here. All right. Now, the Munafiqeen were known to basically engage in this whole rumor, this whole false rumor, but then some other good people, and in particular, right there, we're talking about Mistah. Mistah was related to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. So Mistah was one of these people Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was donating to. In other words, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was the one that was supporting his family, supporting him, because Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was considered rich. Mistah was poor, but unfortunately, Mistah actually engages in this rumor. It's like engages in this rumor. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is angry at this. How could you engage in talking against my own daughter when I'm the one that's giving you all those donations? In other words, I'm subsidizing you and giving you basically the financial support that you're in need of. And here you go, you actually talk against my daughter and you start defaming my daughter and you get involved in all of this. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq gets so angry and he says, Wallahi, I'm not going to support him financially because of what he's doing. So that's when that ayah was revealed. Do not let the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be an obstacle for basically عُرْضَةً لِأَيْمَانِكُمْ. If you had made an oath, don't let the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be an obstacle to your commitment, basically to do what is good or what is a principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or what brings in reconciliation between people. So what am I supposed to do? Well, that's when that ayah was revealed. من حلف على يمين فرأى غيرها خيرا منها فليأتي الذي هو خير وليكفر عن يمينه. Whoever had done an oath, then you had realized that something else was better than it, then in that situation, do what is right and pay the expiation on that behalf or on behalf of the oath that you had made. So you could see, what he wanted to indicate here. You could see that whether it's this ayah that we had just read or whether it was the reason why this hadith was narrated, they said all of this is to indicate that that expiation is to be paid on behalf of something that you would do in the future and not necessarily something that you were lying about. Because if you're lying about something, it's not enough, according to those scholars, it's not enough to just pay an expiation for a yameen that you probably had seen something better than the yameen, the oath that you had made. So that was basically that opinion. قال ابن العربي. Let's say, and we mentioned that one actually. Ibn al-Arabi, who's Ibn al-Arabi? Ibn al-Arabi is basically a Maliki scholar, and he was from Ishbiliya. Okay, he said, well, the ayah is basically constituting of two things. Number one, illahu, which basically, let's go back and show that to you. So Ibn al-Arabi was saying, well, what this looks like, this is talking about in the future, okay? And this is talking about the yameen that one would basically do here. So the last one and the first one basically said this is what you would make an expiation for. But the past and the witness one, those don't actually qualify for an expiation. That's what he wanted to say. He said, so what you could see, most people would do the amen based on those two areas, things that they don't really mean, or things that basically are speaking about in the future, and then they realize that that wasn't a good thing to do. Then in that situation, to stay committed is to stay committed to the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's see here. So here al-Qurtubi wanted to object to something right there. Let's see. He said, قلت, well, not necessarily object, but let's see what he says. قلت, now one thing he said, and I would say, during our master's and PhD master's thesis and PhD dissertation, they would always tell us, don't use this kind of way of speaking, because you're somehow praising yourself. That when you say, I would say, or my response to this, because you would be praising yourself, and in that situation, it doesn't appear good in a PhD dissertation, because you're supposed to be a student and not necessarily this person that is at a level to say qult, and I would say. There's somewhat of a self-centricity here. But of course, this was a common thing that they would write their books back in the days, and they would say, well, here's my response. قلت, and he said, al-Bukhari had mentioned the hadith about Abdullah ibn Amr, that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ, who was an A'rabi, the Bedouin, and he said, O Prophet of Allah, what are the major sins? The Prophet ﷺ responded, associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he said, what else? He said, disrespecting the parents. He said, then what else? He said, al-yamin al-ghamus, the oath that a person is lying about, which basically is talking about the witness one. And he said, well, what is the oath that one lies on, or lies basically with? And the Prophet ﷺ said, well, it's the oath that one would get paid for, or one might actually deduct from someone else's wealth when they would know that they're lying about it. Okay? So in other words, whether they're taking from the actual money, or whether they're taking from someone else, in other words, bribed to make an oath just to appear as a truthful witness, then in that situation, that would be considered as taking haram money, and when you're actually lying about it. Let's see right there. Sahih al-Bukhari, this was actually mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari. In other words, it is actually the highest level, and you could see right there the numbering for that, and you basically, let's see, okay. Let's go for another hadith. خرج مسلم عن أبي أمامة. Who's Abu Umama? Abu Umama, the Sahabi. That the Prophet ﷺ had said, من اقتطع حق امرئ مسلم بيمينه فقد أوجب الله له النار وحرم عليه الجنة. فقال رجل وإن كان شيئا يسيرا يا رسول الله؟ قال وإن قضيبا من أراك. Let's see. There's another hadith that the Prophet ﷺ had said, whoever takes away the right of a Muslim by using an oath, then the Lord Almighty had obligated or had basically determined and decreed that they would get hellfire and they would be forbidden from entering Jannah. A man said, even if it's something really small, O Prophet of Allah, and the Prophet ﷺ said, even if that was a stick of arak, a stick of siwak, you know, the stick that you would, the root that you would basically get for siwak. So that root, it's basically just a simple root just to do and cleanse your teeth with. So kind of like a twig from a branch of a tree, basically. But it's not a twig from the tree. It's basically the root of the tree is called the arak. But here, he basically wanted to say, even if it was that trivial in the eyes of people, if you are to somehow deduct or somehow support and lie about using your oath to lie about somebody's rights, then in that situation, you don't get Jannah. Let's see. The Prophet ﷺ, here's another hadith. I didn't read this one in Arabic. Let me read it for you. So جاء أعرابي إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال يا رسول الله ما الكبائر؟ قال الإشراك بالله. قال ثم ماذا؟ قال عقوق الوالدين. قال ثم ماذا؟ قال اليمين الغموس. قلت وما اليمين الغموس؟ قال الذي يقتطع مال امرئ مسلم هو فيها كاذب. هو فيها كاذب. So I already interpreted that one. And let's see this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, من حلف على يمين صبر يقتطع بها مال امرئ مسلم هو فيها فاجر لقي الله وهو عليه غضبان. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. What does that mean? So he said, whoever is to make an oath and basically in order to take away from someone's rights and they would know that they're lying about it, all right, then they would meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not content, in other words, angry at them. That's when this ayah was revealed. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَشْتَرُونَ بِعَهْدِ اللَّهِ وَأَيْمَانِهِمْ ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا, basically to the end of the ayah. Okay, those that would, the word yashtarun, it's, yes, it's a trade, it's to buy, but here it's basically yashtarun to mean that they would use the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and use what appeared to be the commitment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what they would basically buy or trade that for. In other words, the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their oath, they would basically trade it for the actual truth, and they would lie about something. So that's basically this ayah right there. And you could see, he said, you could see that this ayah didn't say that there was an option if the person was lying about their oaths. It didn't say that there was an option of paying an expiation. And he said that is al-Qurtubi, considering, this is still qult. This is basically al-Qurtubi basically saying, well, if we are going to say that there was a kafara, then by paying the expiation, that would basically remove and certainly wipe away all the crime that he had committed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically be content over him, and he would not be deserving all that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had promised that he would do with him. In other words, he was basically warning him that he would hold him accountable for all of that. And he said that that's like an oxymoron. There's no way that you could basically make an oath while you're lying about it and at the same time just say, well, you could just pay an expiation, you'll be fine. And he said what this person had done is far more extreme than just breaking an oath, because this person had regarded that someone else's rights were going to be his place basically, that, yeah, I took this money and now it's all mine. I paid the kafara, so I'm all done. But he said this is taking people's rights, and it doesn't have to be wealth alone, but this could also involve perhaps people's rights in general. Maybe the person is lying. Did you see this
Ya
person?
Allah, that's so scary.
That's so scary. It's so scary. And subhanallah, I mean, you could see right now, there's, another, I guess, thing that's going out right now in the media because Al Maghrib Institute had announced that they're laying off, I guess, some of their teachers. But of course, I'm sure there were some different people involved in that Yameen, in that witness, etc. But this is really scary to make a lie and make a yameen that you're lying about it. Let's see. So here you said al-istighfafu bil-yamin billah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to not take the oath, making it in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in considering the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and basically not taking that as a magnificent thing, as a serious thing, and basically being so negligent and not caring about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's magnificence or even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's glory, then in that situation, the result is going to be that the person is going to be humiliated for what they did not regard in Allah on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then in that situation, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded that this oath is something magnificent that you are committed in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, well, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet ﷺ called it Yameen al-Ghamus. It was called Yameen al-Ghamus. The word Ghamus, it basically means to dip and soak inside something. So what is that? What are we soaking in? What is yameen? So we understand the oath, but ghamus actually means to dip and soak someone in something. Why is it called ghamus then? Soaking in what? Well, that's because that person is going to be soaked in hellfire. لا إله إلا الله. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. So there you could see of how big and how dangerous this sin is, to just lie about it and think that they could just get away with it. This is somebody's right that you're basically making an oath in regards to. You either make an oath to something that you're truthful about or don't make an oath at all. Let's see. What if a person had basically done an oath to not do or basically بألا يفعل على بر ما لم يفعل فإن فعل حنث ولزمته الكفارة. So what happened? Let's say a person basically wanted to make an oath. That's basically right there. What if a person lied about it in the past, or whether saying I will do such and such? We mentioned that one, so we're not going to go over it again. Oh, what if the question is they made an oath to probably, let's say, not eat cheesecake? Just by taking a bite, that's enough. You don't have to eat the whole thing. Just by taking a bite. Then in that situation, you are considered that you were not committed with your oath. Even if it's just a small amount? Yes, even if it's a lick of it, you had just broken the oath. Unless you would make an oath that you're not going to eat the whole thing. Then you can't eat the whole thing, but you can eat part of it. Okay, let's see. What if the person made an oath that they would not enter somebody's home, but then they put in just one leg? Then in that situation, yes, just even if they just put in one leg, that's basically going to be holding them accountable for that oath. What about in terms of making the yameen? What is this supposed to be in? So number one, you're basically making an oath by the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such as Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Wal-Rahman, Wal-Rahim, Wal-Sami' Wal-Alim. That's all permissible. وعزة الله, بعزة الله, بقدرة الله, بعلم الله, etc. all of that is going to be considered. But what is Qudratillah? What is Izzatillah? Izzatillah is basically you're making an oath by the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by His honor, biqudratillah, by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the glory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the magnificence of Allah, by the ahdillah is basically, well, the covenant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so all these different things, they're basically considered as yameen, because all those names and attributes, they're basically involving one particular magnificent one, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's exactly like you're doing the yameen in the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, let's see. الترمذي and النسائي had narrated that Jibreel عليه السلام لما نظر إلى الجنة, when he looked at Jannah and he went to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, وَعِزَّتِكَ لَا يَسْمَعُ بِهَا أَحَدٌ إِلَّا دَخَلَهَا. By your glory, anybody that would hear about this, they will enter it, because he was basically thinking that this is, if anybody would hear about this, they'd be like, they'll believe it. They'll definitely, this is so magnificent. And you could see that he had said, وَعِزَّتِكَ. وَعِزَّتِكَ is like by your glory. In other words, that was an oath that he had done by using وَعِزَّتِكَ. So basically using by the glory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's see here, Sunan al-Tirmidhi, and they basically said, Hasanun Sahih. So basically, the Tirmidhi was saying, who's the Tirmidhi? Just an idea. Tirmidhi is from a city called Tirmidh, and Tirmidh, until today, they would call it Tirmiz, is basically in Uzbekistan. By the way, it's so sad that we don't know much about Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is a magnificent country, by the way. It's one of my dreams to go there. And Tirmidh, it was considered one of those countries that was considered like Harvard today. So you had Maru, Merv, we said it was in Iran, but at the time it was considered as, I guess, within that area, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, those areas were considered, let's say, the hot spots for most of the scholars, like al-Bukhari, like al-Tirmidhi. Well, Nasa'i is from Nasa, and he was living in Egypt. But you're talking about the most important scholars were actually coming. Al-Tabari, well, okay, that was from Iran. But you want to keep in mind that all that area was considered Bilad ma wara al-Nahr. Bilad ma wara al-Nahr, the city that was behind the river. That river doesn't exist anymore. I'm not really sure exactly why, but there was a river there, and ما وراء النهرين. There were two rivers, not one, but they would consider that just by passing that river that you had reached their country. And of course, the Uzbek, some Uzbek, they would consider themselves that they're part, Turks, and at least in ancestry. So they have their language, and later, of course, they were basically they were colonized, and certainly under the USSR, I guess Union colonization, whatever you want to call it. Until the time of today, you would see lots of Uzbek, actually, in fact, majority of the Uzbek, they would speak Russian and also their own languages, actually. Be interesting if we had anybody that is Uzbek and basically educate us about the Uzbek, but it's fair, if we're talking about Tirmidh, fair to actually speak about Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, and many other scholars that were actually from Uzbekistan. So yes, definitely had a very rich area, very smart, very intelligent. Let's see. And of course, خرج, who's خرج here, going to Tirmidhi and in Nasa'i, narrated off Ibn Umar, that he said, لا ومقلب القلوب. What is that? he said he had made a yameen that كانت يمين النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا ومقلب القلوب. No, by the one that would turn the hearts of people. So what did he do? So in other words, by the action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who's muqallib al-qulub? It's basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is muqallib al-qulub and what does that mean? So the word qalb, the root of it is qalaba. Let me write that down, okay? Just to clarify, what are we talking about here? So the word qalb, qalaba, that's the root. Oops, I was writing in English, hold on. Qalaba. The word qalaba actually means to flip. But at the same time, when you see to flip, but the word qalb, so qalaba is the root, qalb with a sukoon on the lam, basically means well, basically the actual flipping, I guess. But it also means a heart. How, well, the heart doesn't flip. How is it that it's basically related to it? Right. So the reason why some scholars had said the reason why the heart is called qalb, meaning flipping or from the root flip, is because the person, they continuously change. Their hearts continuously change. You like something today, you don't like it tomorrow. You're angry today, you're happy tomorrow. لِكَثْرَةِ تَقَلُّبِهِ, because it continues to change. And that's for the same thing. The Prophet ﷺ used the same exact wording and said, لَا وَمُقَلِّبَ الْقُلُوبِ. لَا, when he objected to something, no, by the one that transforms or flips the hearts. Or لا ومصرف القلوب. No, and by the one that basically would redirect the heart. Redirect the heart. What is that supposed to tell us? I mean, when we're speaking about muqallib al-qulub, that you always have to take in consideration that you always want to make sure that you stay steadfast, because your qalb changes one day and another. And this is extremely scary, because you would think of yourself that, yes, I'm a firm believer, I got everything in place. You know, when those times when all of the sudden you wake up and it's like all of the sudden you just got something enlightened in your mind. Well, that's exactly the same way, just like when you would feel that just today you just had a new vision. And I don't mean by a vision, by a dream, that you just all of a sudden it's like something became clear in your life. And that really changes who you are. Well, the same thing can actually happen, that one day, and this is the time that we're living in, by the way, what is scary is that the Prophet ﷺ had talked about part of the signs of Judgment Day is that يُصْبِحُ الرَّجُلُ مُؤْمِنًا وَيُمْسِي كَافِرًا. The person would wake up as a believer and sleep as a disbeliever, and wake up as a disbeliever and wake up as a believer. What is that? Because the amount of fitan are going to be so tremendous. They're just going to be everywhere, and there's going to be around the clock that the person might come across a certain fitna or a certain I guess fitna or challenge that might actually change them. A believer this hour, the second hour, a different person. And you know what? It's so scary when we look at that the Prophet ﷺ had said that there is going to come a time, which is speaking about our time today, that il-fitan are going to be in such abundant in such a abundant amounts that تجعل الحليم حيران. it would basically make the person that is most wise all of a sudden so confused about, well, what could the solution be? Because the fitan are just left and right. You don't just have one problem, but you got so many different problems. They're like a rolling snowball. And you're just confused all about all of these problems. How am I going to solve all of this? They're just beyond anybody's intelligence to know how to solve these problems in these fitan. There, you would finish with one fitna, but another fitna comes up and another fitna, and you're like, what am I going to do? How to solve all of this? Because people are just completely going far away from the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that it's confusing even the smartest of how we could solve these problems. So looking at that, the لا ومقلب القلوب, it's to remember at least the piece of it. Yes, what Al-Qurtubi wanted to mention here was, I guess, emphasize that the Prophet ﷺ made the oath using the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not the essence. Because remember, the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're going to, inshallah, continue the names and attributes. I still didn't continue the names and attributes. I'm really excited about that, inshallah. We got to continue those classes. Remind me about that, Noura. So when you're looking at the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they could be describing the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they could also be describing the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this yameen was basically associating the letter of yameen, the preposition of yameen, oath that is, which is the letter wa or ba or ta, and basically using then the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This one was making an oath using the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that by His glory, by His power, by His will, this is the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this one is making it by the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by He is the controller of flipping the hearts, or He's the one that has the power to redirect the vision of the hearts. Okay. But all scholars had unanimously agreed if the person was to use wallahi, billahi, or tallahi. So those are the different ways of oaths. What are we looking at here? Let's look at it. Here's that ta, and here's that ba right there, and here's that wa. Those are basically all words of wallah, or words for making an oath. But wait a minute. Don't we find like wal-fajr, wal-duha, wal-layli idha saja? So can we make similar oaths using wal-fajr, wal-duha, wal-asr? The answer is no. You cannot. Why? Well, why not? Well, that's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the right and is the only one to basically make an oath in what he regards as basically a resemblance of his power. So whether we're speaking about dawn, morning, asr time, afternoon, or just different times that, or different things that فَوَرَبِّكَ and etc. All these different oaths that the ayat were doing, then in that situation, that's exclusive for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only asked you to make an oath in His name alone, and not using other things, because that would be considered shirk for you. But certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can make the oath in al-fajr, in al-sama, in al-tariq, in al-sama'i wa tariq, etc. That's exclusive for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but not you using that glorification, that method of glorification. So if the person had basically made the oath using these names, Tallahi, Billahi, Wallahi, that they would basically, if they had basically Hanith, basically had broken, there we go, had broken, that was broken English, had broken there, or at least were not committed to the oath, then in that situation, they would have to pay il-kafara. they would have to pay the expiation. And let's see, Ibn al-Mundhir. Who's Ibn al-Mundhir? We talked about Ibn al-Mundhir before, and we said Ibn al-Mundhir had his own madhab. Yes, he had his own madhab. Okay, just keep that one in mind. Okay, let's see. And he said Malik, al-Shafi'i, Abu Ubaid. Well, let me just, we know Malik. Malik is basically Malik ibn Anas, died 179 Hijriya. Al-Shafi'i basically is Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i. Abu Ubaid, well, al-Shafi'i died, al-Shafi'i died 205 Hijriya. Abu Ubaid, who's Abu Ubaid? Abu Ubaid was originally from Afghanistan. He was as knowledgeable in specifically about wealth, and I guess the fiqh of money. That's Abu Ubaid. Abu Thawr, Ishaq, and the different scholars, Ashab al-Ra'i, basically the Hanafi, they said whoever makes an oath using the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then they would not be committed to that oath, then in that situation, they would have to pay the expiation. And he said, and this is basically the madhab that we would consider, and we don't know any other differences of opinion on that. Okay? That he doesn't know any other differences of opinion. Was, in other words, there's no running away. Let's see. Here, trying to get to the most important things, because I promised I'm not going to basically stick to all of this. What time is it? Oh dear. Oh, my laptop was about to turn off. There. All right. All right. So they had differences of opinions on things using وحق الله وعظمة الله وقدرة الله وعلم الله. So in other words, they had differences of opinions on waymullah and whether that is an oath or not. Is that considered if a person says وحق الله, or somebody says, I guess they're making this oath, but they're using a different way, by the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc. So Malik, why did he want to emphasize Malik? He wanted to emphasize Malik because Al-Qurtubi himself is Maliki madhab. He said all of these are basically forms of oaths. And therefore, if the person were to not stay committed to those oaths, then in that situation, they would have to pay the expiation. Okay, so let's see. But Shafi'i basically said, well, it depends on what the person had the intention, based on what their intention was. So if their intention was to really mean that this is an oath, even though we don't really have anything that says that this is what an oath could be looking like, or at least let's say what can be as part of a method of an oath. But he said it is possible, and that this was an oath, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and being committed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his magnificence and glory, then in that situation it is possible that this is an oath. And even though uh, of course he basically didn't find that there was any report that the Prophet ﷺ had done such a yameen, but if this person meant and intended with it to be an oath, then so it is. And he said, in lam yurid biha al-yamin falaysat biyamin. But according to Shafi'i, if the person didn't intend with this to be an oath, then in that situation, it's not an oath. Okay? It's really funny how he wanted to say is Shafi'i, but then quoting Shafi'i, and instead he quotes from it Tamheed. This is a mistake. What's a mistake? It-Tamheed is for Ibn Abd al-Barr. That's a Maliki madhab. If you want to quote a Shafi'i, you have to go to the books of a Shafi'iyya, not the books of Malikiyya. Yeah. If this was a PhD dissertation, man, they point that out and rip them up. Okay, let's continue. Yeah, just looking at these things.
Nobody's perfect, alhamdulillah.
Yeah. Oh my God. Noura, during those PhD defense, especially PhD, man, those people would just have just a moment of, especially in the Arabic world, I must admit, it's all about them presenting themselves and trying to put you down. That's not what happened at my PhD dissertation, thank God. But they would usually, it is just about putting the student down and letting them know that, listen, even if we are to approve your PhD, you gotta know that you're still a talib ilm. But yeah, they'll look into these little things at the footnotes. So in a PhD dissertation, they would look at each and every single little thing like this one that I just pointed out. Okay. أصحاب الرأي. Who are أصحاب الرأي? Anybody guess? Get $1 million. أصحاب الرأي. Who are أصحاب الرأي? The Hanafi madhab. Well, so why are they called أصحاب الرأي?
I was just going to say that, subhanAllah.
أحسنتي
Because
Noura,
you
get $1
just said
million.
that.
Exactly. I just said that. Exactly. So Matina will pay you the $1 million. Okay, so أصحاب الرأي are basically the Hanafi madhab. Why are they called أصحاب الرأي? What does that mean anyways? So أصحاب means friends, companions. الرأي means opinion. So what? They're just a people of opinion and just self-thought? Why were they called so? No, they were called so because they used to lay out a number of different hypothetical cases to grow and expand their fiqh. Versus the other madhahib, they didn't lay out hypothetical questions, but they would stick to the cases that were coming forward. But Ashab al-Ra'i said, no, let's actually expand our fiqh, lay out even hypothetical questions and hypothetical cases, scenarios, etc., and basically go and dig deep on how we could solve these matters. We don't have to wait for those scenarios to happen. We could expand the way that we could see the paradigms, we could see the different cases, we could see the different, I guess, ways to canonize fiqh, and that's why they were called Ashab al-Ra'i. Very smart and very, very, you could think of Ashab al-Ra'i, as a complete school. It's a whole school. You would find some teachers, depending on the method, some teachers, they like to have their class. The teacher is talking, everybody else is quiet, and they would lay out the different hadith, lay out the different ayat, and expecting you to just listen, and that's basically it. Al-Madhab al-Hanafi was quite different. المذهب الحنفي, definitely Abu Hanifa was very selective on who's actually joining his class. So it was Yaqub ibn Ibrahim, it was basically Zufar, very selective students. Okay. And of course, we can't forget Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani and a couple others, but those are the most important ones. And very selective. And those students would basically be within, I guess, the halaqah. And Abu Hanifa would lay out different scenarios and then challenge the students. What do you think the answer is going to be? How would you solve this? What would be the greatest solution? What's the evidence? Give me the ayah for it. Give me the hadith for it. And of course, this expanded the intelligence, and simply this led these students, so challenging these students, and they were young men. When you're looking at Yaqub ibn Ibrahim, who was later Abu Yusuf, he was just literally a kid, probably a 12 or a 13-year-old, and he later became the most important student. Him and Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, they became the most important students for al-Madhab al-Hanafi. In fact, Abu Yusuf or Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani can sometimes have their opinion that's probably different than Abu Hanifa himself. just see that. And yeah, let's see. Ashab al-Ra'i, they said, if the person said, وَعَظَمَةِ by the glory of Allah, by the magnificence of Allah, by the, I guess, the kibriya illah, by the pride of Allah, by the promise or by the covenant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then in that situation, they would, and if they had broken their oath, then they would have to do a kafara. Let's see right there. Said al-ishraf. Why go into al-ishraf? Go to bada'a sana'a, go to anything that, no, that's also a mistake. But okay, let's see. Muhammad ibn al-Hasan. Who's Muhammad ibn al-Hasan? Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, basically part of Ashab al-Ra'i. We just mentioned his name just earlier. Why did he put this in brackets? He put it in brackets because he wanted to say that not all manuscripts were saying Muhammad ibn Hassan, and they just said وقال al-Hasan. In regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said في حق وحق الله. If the person to say by the truth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said that that's not an oath, and there's no expiation if the person were to not be committed to it. And that's basically Abu Hanifa's opinion. And who mentioned that? Al-Razi. Ironically, I guess Al-Qurtubi didn't have enough resources to go to the Hanafi books and actually dig that out. So why go to Al-Razi? It's a completely different madhab than Abu Hanifa. Okay. Oh, just wanted to note that. Let's see. Abu Hanifa said, Inna aradna al-amanata. He said, well, al-amana itself, even though the ayah was saying, al-amana, that we had basically introduced, and we're not talking about introducing, it was basically right there, would you take this amana? Would you take this promise? Would you stay committed to this amana, to this promise, to this thing that you're going to be held accountable for? And he said it's basically all the different things, al-iman wa shara'a. Al-iman wa shara'a. He said that was in al-amana here is basically the legislatures that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to hold people accountable for. So in other words, he had basically exposed it or introduced it on is-samawat, on the heavens, on the earth, and other things that were created, but then they all did not want to take that oath. And of course, some of the Hanafi scholars, they said that this was actually involving al-amana is to mean al-yamin, is to mean an oath. Okay, let's continue right there. Ibn al-Mundhir, all right, Ibn al-Mundhir, he said, it was evident and authentic that the Prophet ﷺ had said, Waymullah, إن كان لخليقا للإمارة في قصة أسامة ibn Zayd وأبيه Zayd. What did he say? The Prophet ﷺ said, Waymullah, it's like saying by the glory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And speaking about that, this person that is Usama ibn Zayd and his father, Zayd ibn Haritha, basically, that they are fit for leadership. What is the story? Well, Usama ibn Zayd, he was basically considered to the Prophet ﷺ somewhat like a grandson. In fact, he was called al-Hib ibn al-Hib. His father was Zayd ibn Haritha. Who's Zayd ibn Haritha? Zayd ibn Haritha was the Prophet ﷺ's adopted son. He used to be called Zayd ibn Muhammad. Later, when the ayah was revealed in Surah Al-Ahzab, "Ud'uuhum li'abaihim," and attribute them to their fathers, then the name Zayd ibn Muhammad was changed to Zayd ibn Haritha, who's actually his father. In other words, don't confuse things. You got to live the truth. Don't make it seem like they are your children when in reality you know that that's not true. Okay, so when you look at right there, the Prophet ﷺ, the whole point in all of this is not to necessarily say whether they are qualified for the position of leadership or not. It was basically saying that the Prophet ﷺ had also made the oath by saying, Waymullah. Waymu Allah. Let's see, Ibn Abbas and Ibn Umar. They said, Waymullah. يقول Waymullah وكذلك قال ابن عمر. And even Ibn Umar, كان ابن عباس يقول Waymullah. So basically, Ibn Abbas also used to make this oath, Waymullah, and so was Ibn Umar. Let's see. Okay, now this is really good. Going to the reference of Ibn Abd al-Razzaq. Ibn Abd al-Razzaq directly. Okay, good job. Let's continue right there. Ibn Ishaq إذا أراد بأيم الله يمينا كانت يمينا بالإرادة وعقد القلب. Who's Ishaq? Ishaq ibn Rahaway or Rahoya. I asked, so the word Rahoya is basically a Turkish word, but of course Turkish, we're talking about the other Turks. We're talking about Uzbekistan. And I asked ChatGPT what Rahoya meant. It said that it meant in their language, it said that it was meaning priest or a sheikh or something like that. So anyhow, Ishaq ibn Rahoya said that, or it's not Rahaway, it's actually Rahoya. And that what was intended bi aymillah, if the person had intended with aymillah as an oath, then in that situation, just by having that intention, then that would mean that, hey, look at the ayah. The ayah was saying that if you had, let's look at the ayah right there. The ayah was saying, aqattumul ayman. Then if the person meant with that and intended that such a word would be an oath by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's enough and that should suffice and that would make it a yameen. So let's get the other thing. Can I say, will Quran, put my hand over the Quran and actually make an oath on the Quran itself? Yeah, put your hand on your Quran and raise your left hand and basically make an oath on the Quran. Is that permissible or is that a bid'ah? Let's see. Ibn Mas'ud, he basically said if the person were to basically not be committed to what he was making an oath on, which is the Quran, then with each and every single ayah, 6,236 ayahs. Okay, let's see. 6,236 ayahs. So those basically would be the number of times that this person basically broke their yameen, and therefore they would have to do a kafara for 6,236 times. That's according to Ibn Mas'ud and Al-Hasan al-Basri. And Ahmad said, ما أعلم شيئا يدفعه. Said, I don't actually know anything that could basically wipe such an expiation. Abu Ubaid, remember he was from Herat, Afghanistan. He said, no, this is actually one oath, Quran. This is just one oath. Abu Hanifa said, there is no expiation on this. In other words, it's a very dangerous yameen. And Qatada, we talked about Qatada before, a great scholar, we talked about him before. He said that he had actually hated that a person would put his hand over the Quran and actually make a yameen on that. Ahmad and Ishaq, this is opinion number 5, said we don't actually hate that. In other words, it's permissible to do. Okay, so just keep that one in mind. So can we get the Quran and actually make an oath on that? So you could see, just laid out the differences of opinions on whether it's one kafara or whether it's 6,236 kafaras. Wait a minute. Let's actually do that numbering. If it's 6,236 kafaras, how many needy people are you going to feed in that? Okay, we're talking about what are you going to do? 6,236, and you're basically feeding 10 people, and let's just assume that every single needy person was $8. Okay, so we're looking at you're feeding 62,360 people. Man, that's a whole city. That's a whole city. And let's just assume we're doing it $8 per person. That's almost $500,000. 498,880. That's almost $500,000. Noura, we gotta really be committed. That's it. I can't afford this. All right. Right? Okay, let's continue. What time is it? Oh, 12:27. Wow, that went by fast. Man, that just imagine we're taking this opinion. Man,
You know,
that
we started an hour earlier
is
by
that good news or
accident.
bad news? Oh, by accident?
Yeah.
Oh man. Is that good news or bad news?
I'm
Or
just trying to get you to delay the class.
or some bad
Put
news.
some more time.
Put
You
some
know?
more time? I mean, I don't mind putting in more time because I'm living on the
No,
equator.
I have a question though. I put in the chat,
Yay.
but it's what if somebody like is at war with that country? Like, you know, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that war is deception, right?
Right. We're actually going to get there, but generally speaking,
Oh,
Noura,
sorry.
yeah, we're going to get there. So in situations when you are probably your life is in danger, all right? So in that situation, you can make such yamin. When your life is, we're not talking about your life being in danger and you had committed a crime, okay? We're talking about that the enemy is wanting you to probably reveal some information, etc. Definitely, even if they were asking you to make an oath, then make an oath, and certainly you have to keep the Muslims protected, and certainly the word deception. We're going to get there. What about if the husband, you're asking your husband if he loves you, but let's just assume, okay, he doesn't love you. Can he actually make a yamin? We're gonna get there. I know. Can he do that? But he's got a whole family. What should he do?
That's so wrong.
Is it? Okay. What do you think, Nora? Is it? What
I
what
mean, I just think it would be wrong to just not love your wife. I don't know.
it's wrong to, well, you don't control your heart, Nora. You know, people, I mean, even the Prophet ﷺ said, اللهم هذا قسمي فيما أملك فلا تلومني فيما تملك ولا أملك. Ya Allah, this is my share in what I am capable of controlling. Don't hold me accountable for what you control and I don't control. Right? So what do we do now? We're looking at the hearts. I mean, love is in a person's hands. Is it? No, it's not. You don't control what you love. You just happens. You just happens. So what is the ruling in that regards? We're going to talk about it, inshallah.
So
Let's see. Go ahead, dear.
sorry. To swear by Quran, the issue is not to put our hands on it. We use it in the court maybe, but the issue is as Quran as Kalamullah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's permissible to make an oath or qasam, because we can say والقرآن وليس رب القرآن، مثل ما نقول الكعبة ورب الكعبة, because this is the word of Allah.
Right, so that's why he said اختلفوا في الحلف بالقرآن. So they had differences of opinions.
Why اختلفوا?
We can go in details. اختلفوا, can you actually make اليمين بالقرآن? Does that mean, because in general, you're supposed to make اليمين in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah,
So
but
can I
this
make
is
اليمين بكلام الله? That's why they had differences of opinions. Can
just
I
to
make
strengthen it.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
You see it? So it's like, okay, I'm supposed to be making yameen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So can I make yameen in his words?
Because the power there in his word.
Right,
to
but
make
that's why
them,
they had differences of opinions.
yeah,
I'm
to them,
supposed to be, you see it? You know, al-ilm is really detailed, and those are really smart people.
yeah.
You know, when you say they had differences of opinions on whether that is permissible or not, you know,
maybe to avoid fall in ولا تجعل الله عرضة لأيمانكم, to say والقرآن is easier, and to make them trust him, just استيثاق.
well, at the end of the day, we're actually going back to the actual resource, which basically is Tafsir al-Qurtubi. So, in other words, that's the resource for al-Fuqaha. That's the resource where the big scholars would actually go back to. All right. So, if I wanted to actually show you all of that, because there's nothing that we're hiding behind the scenes and telling people, well, let's just tell them that they can't do half bil Quran, that way they won't actually get confused on things. Oh, we don't have anything to hide. Okay, so here you could say اختلفوا في الحلف بالقرآن, basically to let us know that they had differences of opinions, whether that was involving glorifying the actions of Allah, the words of Allah, or whether it's glorifying Allah himself. What are we actually looking at? Because we're supposed to be glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that so? The scholars that said that, yes, by me making yameen al-Quran, I wouldn't have done yameen in al-Quran unless I really believed that this was involving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, something magnificent. But the other scholars that probably disagreed that you could do yameen in al-Quran, they basically regarded that no, you would make an oath in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which basically involves wallahi, billahi, tallahi, to go in other things, whether it's in perhaps the book of Allah, or probably say by the word of Allah, by just somehow smaller things, or not smaller to mean it's small, but we're speaking about a tajzi'ah here, partitions, and not necessarily small. We're talking about a partition. That's their differences of opinion. So just wanted to lay it out. You want to make yameen bil Quran, go ahead. But it's just wanted to lay it out over there and just let you see it. Okay, so let's see. You've got this opinion. It said لا تنعقد اليمين بغير الله تعالى وأسمائه وصفاته. That's the point. They said that opinion. They said, well, you cannot have any oath other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or his names or his attributes. So according to these scholars, they said no, you can't do yameen and an oath by the Quran. What about if the person had basically said bin Nabi? This is very common. وحياة النبي.
Shirk.
What if the person had done that? Okay, and this is so common with Egyptians. What is the word that Egyptians would use? Something bin
Nabi.
والنبي.
Nabi.
There you go. والنبي. All right, is that permissible? Let's
No.
see. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he basically said that would be considered an oath. لأنه حلف بما لا يتم الإيمان إلا به. Why? He said because he had made an oath on what would be crucial and in fact part of what faith depends on. And therefore, if the person made such an oath when Nabi, then they would have to pay the expiation if they were to break it, exactly the same way that they would basically make an oath in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's quite interesting,
Would
right?
they have to make their shahada again?
No, because they're Muslim. Why would they're not glorifying the Prophet ﷺ because they think he's God.
Oh,
They're
okay. So that's not shirk?
well, I mean, you'll have differences of opinions between scholars on whether
Oh,
it is
okay,
shirk
okay.
or not, right? Some scholars, like if you were to go to Al-Tahawi, Aqid al-Tahawiyya, they'll consider it as shirk. But if you go to perhaps al-Ash'ari, they'll say, no, they didn't consider it as shirk because they considered it as, well, they glorified the Prophet ﷺ and they glorified the Prophet ﷺ because they glorified that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one that glorified the Prophet as a prophet and basically sent him as a prophet. And the only reason why I believe in the Prophet is because I believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent him. So I don't put the Prophet beyond Allah, but I'm basically here glorifying the Prophet for the glory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the Ash'ari and I guess their debate on this. Okay. Wait a minute. Why did you say Ash'ari and why did you say Maturidi or Tahawi or all of that? You know, this debate, I don't like really going into it, but I would say that we had great scholars that were Ash'ari, great scholars that were, I guess, let's call them Ahl al-Hadith, Maturidi, whatever. And we had great scholars in all schools. And to somehow negate those scholars that were Ash'ari or negate those scholars that were Ahl al-Hadith, and all of a sudden think that no, these people were going to exclude them or somehow negate their ilm because they belong to this madhab or that madhab, I think is absolute jahl, absolute ignorance. And usually the people that are narrow in their vision are the ones to think that it's either my interpretation or that interpretation. Only an ignorant person would do that. There were great scholars from the Ash'ari and there were great scholars from Maturidi or Ahl al-Hadith, and therefore to think that, or Salafi, whatever you want to, whatever label you want to use in our times, okay, at the end, when you are expanding your vision, when your vision had expanded to see the knowledge that they had brought forth, that they had basically researched, you would then have deep respect for these scholars, even if you may disagree with, probably just like you said, is like, hey, when Nabi, that's shirk right on the spot. But there are great scholars that basically had considered that that's not necessarily shirk. I don't like making that yameen. I disagree
No, we're
that
just
it's
asking.
right to do. Yeah, right. My madhab is that you shouldn't be making such a yameen. Okay. But at the same time, to basically regard them as kufr right there, that's it. You're going to be basically saying that 2/3 of the Egyptians, they're basically committing kufr. Because when Nabi's always on their tongue. Okay, this is just an example. I'm just I guess for the sake of just understanding how this would be applied. Okay. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we would just narrow down one interpretation, and based on that interpretation, I'm going to be considering any other interpretation is going to be wrong and therefore contradicting Quran and Sunnah. Being inclusive within the ummah, okay? Don't misunderstand my inclusivity now. Being inclusive within the ummah, within the different interpretations, is actually part of Islam. You have to recognize that there are different interpretations. We have to recognize that the text itself in Lugha Arabiya actually had multiple ways of interpreting things, and therefore, if we have great scholars that had a certain interpretation that the text itself can carry, and it was a considerable opinion that other scholars had considered as a considerable opinion, who am I? Who am I to reject this? At the end of the day, I'm going to lay out basically those opinions and take it from there. You disagree with such an opinion? Well, at least just understand that there are great scholars that said otherwise. Let's see. Is that permissible? Let's see. And al-Qurtubi, even though al-Qurtubi is more Ash'ari, but let's see. That's why, remember when we went those ayat, and which ayah was it? But he went in details and considered that we're supposed to interpret that ayah that was talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power and Yadullah and the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said we're supposed to interpret that as a metaphor and not interpret it literally. That's because he was Ash'ari. Okay, so I don't want to go in details with that one. Let's see. What was evident, what was proven authentic in a Sahihain? What is Sahihain? Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. And also in other resources, that the Prophet ﷺ, he basically caught Umar ibn al-Khattab in like a group of people, and Umar ibn al-Khattab was making an oath and swearing by his father. The Prophet ﷺ then calls upon them and he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ألا إن الله ينهاكم أن تحلفوا بآبائكم فمن كان حالفا فليحلف بالله أو ليصمت. Straightforward. For the Lord Almighty forbids you from making oaths by using your father's names. Whoever is making an oath, then let them make an oath using the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or stay quiet. So here we go. Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, and even Musnad Ahmad. Okay, and now he says, and this is showing that there's that this is exclusive. Anybody that would make an oath in other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the descriptions, then that would not be permissible. So let's see, even though he's Ash'ari, but he's still saying that. Just keeping that one in mind. Let's see. And he said, and this was evident also in another hadith that Abu Huraira had said that the Prophet ﷺ had said, لا تحلفوا بآبائكم ولا بأمهاتكم ولا بالأنداد ولا تحلفوا إلا بالله ولا تحلفوا بالله إلا وأنتم صادقون. What did he say? That the Prophet ﷺ had said, do not make oaths using your father's names, not your mother's names, and not in anything similar to that, or in other words, some different celebrities or whatever it is. وَلَا تَحْلِفُوا إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ, and only make oaths in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And do not make oaths unless you are honest about it. All right? So what if a person said, wa Adam, wa Ibrahim? Then in that situation, is that permissible? Well, according to what he had said, he said, well, this is not even, there's no expiation on them because you're not supposed to be making oaths on using these names. And well, do they have to be honest? Well, they have to be honest all the time. But does this require an expiation if the person was not honest about it? That's the question. So in that situation, al-iman, وَقَدْ حَلَفَ بِمَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْإِيمَانُ إِلَّا بِهِ. Then in that situation, yes, certainly, we definitely, just like when we talked about when Nabi, that this opinion would also
When you say
say,
honest about it, you mean like means it?
I mean, honest about it. So when you're always supposed to be honest about everything.
No, I
right?
mean like is that what you mean?
Well, what we're saying is, even though the ayman, some scholars consider that this doesn't apply as an ayman, as an oath, but does that mean I don't have to pay an expiation if I break it? So regardless, we're just saying in general, regardless of whether you have to pay an expiation or not, just keep in mind that you're supposed to be honest. Let's see.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. Let's see, Abu Huraira. وَقَدْ حَلَفَ بِمَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْإِيمَانُ إِلَّا بِهِ. Even though, like, we know that these are things that you have to believe in as part of your faith, but, you know, the scholars that said that this wasn't an actual oath, it wasn't standing up to an actual oath, according to that opinion. Okay, let's see. On Abi Huraira, there is another hadith. Let's look at this one. The Prophet ﷺ had said, مَنْ حَلَفَ مِنْكُمْ فَقَالَ فِي حَلْفِهِ بِاللَّاتِ فليقل لا إله إلا الله ومن قال لصاحبه تعال أقامرك فليتصدق. What happened? Let's say what happened. It was common, you know, you would have somebody become Muslim, but then certain words the brain was wired on, you know, kind of like a person, I guess, you know, a very common thing, a person that probably was Christian, and they probably, I don't know, they're playing basketball and then got angry on something or whatever it is, and then they said Jesus Christ. Okay, that was not necessarily an oath, but that was a type of, I guess, prayer. All right. So what if a person, of course, they're Muslim right now, but during their Jahiliyyah times, that was a common thing that they would use to say. Did something like that happen to the Sahaba? Absolutely. That sometimes, well, they, of course, brought in, it's a package, their brain is still wired. Yes, they believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, they believe in Islam, but their brain is still wired on to the past lifestyle that might be something that they mean or they don't mean, but it's still there. So the Prophet ﷺ was basically teaching those Sahaba, whoever is making an oath, and in their oath, they basically said billat. What is Illat? Illat was an idol, so it wasn't Allah, it was an idol that they used to worship. Illat, and there's also Al-Uzza, and there's also Manat. Okay, those were basically the different gods for basically for the pagan Arab. So the Prophet ﷺ redirected them and said, just say La ilaha illallah. If this basically slips, you basically slip and you don't mean to do such an oath, then in that situation, just say La ilaha illallah. And that's the same thing with any word. If a person is not used to, I guess, this new lifestyle, they probably said something that they didn't really mean and their tongue slipped with something, then in that situation, let's look at a very common practice. Ta'ala uqamirk. I'll basically bet you on something. So that betting, that's al-muqamara. So when he said, "Man qala li sahibi ta'ala uqamirk falyatasaddaq." If the person slipped their tongue, or they probably meant it and said, "Well, you know what? I bet you on this." What is a betting? That, hey, I would basically prove to you that I'm right, and if I were to win the bet, then you owe me something. So the Prophet ﷺ said, فَلْيَتَصَدَّقْ. If you're used to saying that, well, then you have to donate. Is there a specific number for donation? No, there isn't a specific number for donation, but that's to show you that in order to bring about some investment in a change and a redirection to your behavior, that sometimes you really have to involve sometimes a word of dhikr, just like he was saying, La ilaha illallah, or sometimes you would have to invest in perhaps making sadaqah, perhaps making extra prayer, perhaps making fasting, you know, to invest in something to help you redirect your behavior. So if you do something wrong, don't just let it, just say, oh, well, yeah, I regret it, and that's basically it. No, you regret it, try investing in something good, in donation, perhaps making 1,000 times of astaghfirullah maybe, or perhaps reading 3 juz' Quran to remove that sin that you probably talked about your sister the other day. Maybe you need to, maybe you need to punish yourself and read maybe half the Quran, or maybe 3 ajza, or whatever it is that is a challenging thing to you. And that way you're basically disciplining yourself. You're basically channeling your behavior to get redirected towards something good. So, similar to that. Let's say this story right there.
I mean,
So,
people say that all the time. Like, I bet,
mhm. Well, if they're going to start making sadaqah on that, I bet they'll basically start making sadaqahs. And
you
they'll
just
stop
said it.
I'm joking, Noura, da.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Allah yahdiki, Noura. I was just joking.
So does it mean أقامرك, because it's the formal Arabic in our slang language, أراهنك. This is
Yeah,
bet.
well, that's why it's
Bet.
called, I said, I bet.
Bet. It's أراهنك.
You're right. So it's not, I'm going to, gamble with you. This isn't a gambling. It's basically betting. And Noodle's like, I bet. Noodle's like, well, you just said it. I'm like, duh. Noodle, you're so cute. All right, let's continue.
طب لما بيقول له بتشارط شو معناها؟ بتشارط يعني أراهنك.
Well, that's
Slang.
basically yep. So in your accent, that's what we don't actually have that in the Palestinian accent, charat, but we would say trahin.
يعني the same.
Exactly. So it's uqamiruk or trahin.
Thank you.
All right. So what is al-muqamara? So uqamirk, so it basically means to gamble, but this isn't to gamble in, I guess, that narrow definition of really gambling. We're going to the casino and hey, we're putting in money, but this is actually to bet on something. Okay, we're betting on something, and hey, if I were to win the debate or win, I guess the bet, you basically owe me, I don't know, you owe me something. Okay, so that's basically muqamara. Then in that situation, hey, you're not going to, I guess, bet and pay whatever you had bet on. You're going to donate all of that in order to make sure that you discipline yourself in the future. Okay, let's continue. Here we go. I'm betting on that, right? All right, let's see. Let's look at this.
You're gonna make us broke.
Yeah, exactly. I'll bet on you, right? And what if we were to bet on that Quran? Oh man, that would be how much was it? We were going to be, if we were to pay like $8 per meal, it's going to be like $500,000. That's it. We're broke. All right, let's see. كنا نذكر بعض الأمر وأنا حديث عهد بالجاهلية فحلفت باللات والعزى فقال لي بعض أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بئس ما قلت. وفي رواية قلت هجرا فأتيت رسول الله فذكرت ذلك له فقال قل لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير وانفث عن يسارك 3 وتعوذ بالله من الشيطان ثم لا تعد. Love the story. What happened? So Mus'ab ibn Sa'd, he was narrating off his father. His father said, we were basically off with something. They were doing something. And he said, I was basically just a really brand new revert. In other words, just coming out of Jahiliyyah just recently. And he said, and made an oath, Billati wal Uzza, the 2 known famous idols in Mecca, Illat and Al-Uzza, 2 famous idols that were known in Mecca. So part of the Prophet's companions, they said, what a horrible thing that you had said. You have to stop that. They basically started, going after him. So he comes to the Prophet and he said, well, this is what happened. So what did the Prophet teach him to do? Did he attack him? Did he scold him? He said, no. What did he tell him to do? He said, say La ilaha illallah. There's no God worthy of worship but Allah. He's the only one. I don't associate partners with him. He has all the ownership. All praise is due to Allah, and He is capable of being in control and doing all things. Then blow on your left side for 3 times and seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from shaitan, and don't do this again. ثم لا تعد. Just beautiful. What did the Prophet ﷺ do? Did he scold him? Did he yell at him? No, he just said, say la ilaha illallah. Would make dhikr. In other words, to replace what you had said, just basically replace it with la ilaha illallah, wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulk wa lahul hamd, wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. This right there, this one, just up to here. Okay, just this one right there. La ilaha illallah, wahdahu. If you're going through probably being fearful that you might have sihr, you might have jinn, you might have, meaning exorcism, or anything of that sort, every single day, right after Fajr, you gotta do La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulk wa lahul hamdu wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir for 100 times. And I promise you, you'll be inshallah protected by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that day. Let's see. وانفث عن يسارك ثلاثا, and blow on your left side. What does it mean to blow? Does that mean to spit on the left side? Or does that mean to really blow? Differences of opinions. We're not talking about literally spitting, but where enough is basically to blow, but some of the saliva, some of the air is still coming out. Okay, it can happen that, I guess, little particles might still come out, but this isn't to spit, because that's al-basq. Al-basq is to spit. This is wanfuth. That's enough. Enough is to basically blow air. Okay, it's to blow air on the left side for 3 times. Why? Is it the shaitan? The shaitan side? What does that look like? And وَتَعَوَّذْ بِاللَّهِ, that's very similar. So right there, reading قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ 3 times, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ 3 times, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ 3 times, and blowing in between your palms 3 times, and wiping on your face or wiping on your body, differences of opinions, is also a ruqya. What is a ruqya? Spiritual healing. Spiritual healing that you could do. Let's say you had a nightmare and you were really afraid of that nightmare. That's the sunnah. The sunnah, you put your palms up. You would read قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ 3 times, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ 3 times, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ 3 times, blow 3 times, and you could wipe over your face and blow on your left 3 times. On your left 3 times. And say, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. And in that situation, you would basically be protected. Okay, so let's say, and he said, قال العلماء. Look at the adab. He said, even though he's a scholar himself, he said, the scholars, let's see, what for? سنن النسائي المجتبى ابن العربي said, من حلف بها جادا فهو كافر ومن قالها جاهلا أو ذاهلا يقول لا إله إلا الله. Okay, let's quote that one. So what happened? He said, if Ibn al-Arabi, who's Ibn al-Arabi? Ibn al-Arabi al-Maliki, basically. He said, من حلف بها جادا. If somebody was serious about Wallati wal-Uzza, and actually he was serious about it, then that person they had just left Islam. Then they would have to, basically, I guess, redo their shahada. If the person had said that while they were probably unaware of the ruling, or dhahilan. What is dhahilan? Dhahilan, they, was like a slip of a tongue. They don't really recognize what they were saying. Kind of like many people that when they would become Muslim, or they're probably living within non-Muslim community, and they would, say things like "holy cow" or, "geez" or something like that, then that's dhahil. If a person is dhahil, they don't really know where this is coming from. It's just a word of tongue, and they don't really know that this is actually kufr. To say "holy cow" is kufr, because no cow is holy cow. That's only in Hinduism. So if the person were to say that, then this is kufr, if they really mean it. But if the person said it and they just thought that there's nothing wrong with it, then in that situation we would teach them to say La ilaha illallah, all right? And this would basically remove the sin and basically work in, I guess, learning how to invest in keeping their hearts invested in dhikr, rather than getting their hearts slipping in different words that they shouldn't be saying. Okay, let's see. So this is going to be the last page that we'll be doing right now, inshallah. Said the scholars had said the Prophet ﷺ had ordered whoever basically had mentioned such a thing to say La ilaha illallah as an expiation for, because they had said such a term or such a word, and that's basically as a reminder from, I guess, al-ghafla, when they were saying something that they were not in full awareness of. So in other words, this is to complete that blessing that they're holding on to their Islam. And he said, and the reason why it was basically خص اللات بالذكر لأنها أكثر ما كانت تجري على ألسنتهم. And the reason why this was mentioning Illat was really because that's mostly, I guess it was a trend that people were making oaths using Illat, and basically whether we're speaking about other names of different gods, it would basically take the same ruling. There's no difference. So whether a person said holy cow, geez, or something like that, well, that takes the same exact ruling as making that oath in Illat, which was a common practice at the time. And let's say, and whoever said ta'ala uqamirk, and the same thing, he said what that would mean, simply because they used to bet on things, and betting is taking money that is not lawful onto you. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to stop right here, inshallah. We're going to continue tomorrow, and inshallah, so many different things that we'll be talking about tomorrow. I'm trying to go over different things and answer the questions, and inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Bismillah.
Allah yahfadak. You want to say something, Sister Ustaza Umayya?
Inshallah. As these cases about Yameen, it's under the title of can we swear or not, isn't it? And can we say, I don't know if it's right or wrong, can we say that if we want to use all the hadith with different title, like number 12, number 10, number 8, all these things spoke about the Yameen, but hadith, it's like not work with everyone. يعني I can blend them. Like when we talk about لا تحلفوا بآبائكم ولا بأمهاتكم ولا بالأنداد. This about the human being. Okay? But this hadith not serve the about when we speak about the الحلف بالنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. It's like different. Each one has its witness, has its hadith, every case of Yameen, right?
Well, I mean, they don't contradict each other. We're looking at different scenarios, and the different hadith would lay out the different scenarios and would basically answer the question based on the scenario A, scenario B. So they're not contradicting one another. They're just basically completing one another.
Can we blend them all together under the same?
Absolutely.
title.
يعني خليني بالعربي، يعني هو هذه الأحاديث لا تعارض بعضها، بل هي تكمل بعضها بعضا.
But when the
ما في تعارض، ما في
when
تعارض، هي كلها بمجموعها
yeah.
بتعطينا الإجابة لمختلف السيناريوهات، مختلف القضايا، مختلف المسائل، مختلف الأوضاع، وبناء عليها الأحاديث طبعا بتعالج كل قصة على حدة. ما في تعارض.
What about the الحلف بالقرآن?
So الحلف بالقرآن, when we're speaking about الحلف بالقرآن, is that necessarily included in this or not? That's where they would have differences of opinions. You see it? Because some quotes or because some ahadith may not necessarily include a certain question. It wasn't common. We don't have a direct answer to something. It's really clear. That was man halafa bighayri Allah, etc. Well, does that mean, what if I'm swearing by the Quran itself? That's the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that permissible, not permissible? That's why they'll have these debates. So
Yeah.
in areas where the text itself is, let's do it this way. There's something called, I'm going to write that down, قطعي الدلالة and ظني الدلالة. You know what that means? Let's look it down. Let's look at it. What is قطعي الدلالة? I'm going to write it down. There's قطعي الدلالة and there's ظني الدلالة. What is that? You can actually have a quote, but the quote itself can be either قطعي الدلالة. There's no way that you can interpret it but in one way. That's قطعي. It's absolute. It's absolute in its indication, absolute in its interpretation. There's no other way to interpret it in. Some things, they can be ظني. What is ظني? ظني, they're not absolute. They contain some ambiguity, and this ambiguity within the text, it can carry and basically include multiple interpretations, and therefore what this text is indicating might not necessarily be too absolute and can carry multiple interpretations, and that's the area where you might mostly have differences of opinions on.
And isn't that most of the issues?
No, because you can
Oh,
have
it's
differences
not.
of
Okay.
opinions. It's of course, well, it's most of the issues, but you can also have differences of opinions on something that is قطعي الدلالة, but then they'll probably debate on probably the authenticity of that report, or probably
Oh, yeah,
whether
that's
something
true.
is included in it or not. You see what I'm saying? You can have something قطعي الدلالة. Let's give an example right there, okay? So when it says إطعام 10 مساكين, okay? If you're saying إطعام 10 مساكين, الإطعام is known. Okay, so I'm feeding these 10 people. It's pretty straightforward. You got 10 needy people, that's what you're going to feed them. So what is a miskin? Can that be a faqir? Can a miskin also be a person that probably has money? They've got a job, they've got the money, but they're probably behind with some of their, I guess the money wasn't enough to cover their needs. How much is that? In 10 masakin, can I feed a person, that same miskin, I'm bringing him a meal for 10 days? Is that okay? 10 masakin, it didn't specify 10 different people where I'm getting Amani, Wafa, Muhsina, whatever, 10 people. Can I make it one person 10 times? إطعام 10 مساكين. Am I going to, what kind of food? Does it have to be involving bread? What kind of food are we talking about? You see, so even though it is right there where it's straightforward, okay, telling you 10 needy people, but I can get so many questions just from one one quote, even though it's, you could say it's like قطعي الدلالة. Come on, it's right there. It's absolutely clear. Where did you get all these questions from? But you can bring about, so many questions, and still think that, okay, well, it is straightforward. But then you could say that it can always also still contain many questions out there, those hypothetical questions, and the list goes on and on. How are we going to interpret this? Is this ظنية الدلالة or is this قطعي الدلالة? It's قطعي الدلالة, there's no doubt, even though it's قطعي الدلالة, but then we can go into some form of ambiguity. Well, 10, what about the same person 10 times? You see it? Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm just laying out those philosophical questions, I guess. And did I answer your question, Ustaza Umayya?
Yeah, so this ayah is same time قطعي الدلالة and ضمير الدلالة.
Every single quote, I mean, you can also debate on whether something is ظنية الدلالة or قطعي الدلالة. But, then in that situation, it could also be ظنية الدلالة in regards to probably the topic that we're covering.
But as an ayah, what I understood, it's قطعي. And now
absolutely. As an ayah, it's generally قطعية الدلالة.
Yeah. Now I understood what you mean by the ظن الدلالة. جزاك الله خيرا.
وإياكم. So this is it, inshallah. We'll see you all tomorrow. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت